just going to make a few points in order to bridge the discussion with Cedric. There have been teachers in my family for the last 200 years, since the beginning of the 19th century when free blacks from Martinique and Guadeloupe, as a result of the Haitian Revolution, moved to Puerto Rico. And I learned to teach from my grandfather. I told Yvette this several times. When I was 3 years old, my grandfather put me out with the chickens. He gave me a topic, and he would be correcting me from behind. And if I did well, I could go across the street to where his great-grandmother lived, and who had been teaching in the beginning of the 19th century, to get my evaluation based on the report from my grandfather. And I had to speak much louder than I can speak now, and I had to make at least 3 points. And the only weapon that I had was a little baseball bat in case the chickens bit my nose. So my great-grandmother, or my grandfather's great-grandmother, would be very upset because I'm going to make more than 3 points this afternoon. I wouldn't get a very good grade. The first point that I'd like to make is this. In addition to there being chickens in the backyard, there was also a tree, for those of you who are from Puerto Rico, a tree that grows in the southern coast of our country called anispe tree, which is, together with querepas, some of the fruit that only grow in the southern coast of our country that faces the Caribbean. And my grandfather told me a story about that tree, which is the point of reference for what I want to share with you today to complement what Cedric presented here. In 1898, the U.S. military invades our country. And that's why some of us are here. If you invade our country, we'll invade yours. And during the period in which the Spaniards are leaving Puerto Rico and the Americans are taking over town after town, in Ponce, the city where these free blacks from Martinique and Guadeloupe resided, the mulattoes who used their money to free other children who had been the product of slavery before they were baptized, the mulattoes took cork and darkened their faces. And during this period in which there's no government in Puerto Rico, they had been keeping a list of who were the slave masters and who were the children of the slave masters. And those slave masters were kidnapped and hung. And one of the places in which they were hung was in that nispero tree in our backyard. So the connection between teaching and politics was very clear to me since I was 3 years old, that you have to be consistent between your principles and what you did with those principles. I didn't try to teach the chickens that because that wasn't part of the lesson plan. There was also in my grandfather's house a picture or a carving that had the following statement, and I'll translate in a minute. Una de guerrera gente y de sabiduría fuente. Birthplace of warring people and source of wisdom. It took me years to understand the connection between that and being a teacher. I'll repeat, the birthplace of warring people and source of wisdom. There is a woman in India who's the equivalent of Noam Chomsky here in the United States, named Arundhati Roy, who's the best example that I can give of this combination of birthplace of warring people and source of wisdom. Arundhati Roy says that when you are a colonial subject, one of the things that you have to do if you're a good teacher is explain to other colonial subjects the consequences of decisions that are made within the empire for those who live in the colonies. There's an echo of this in the, I know I'm being pedantic, but please. In the autobiography of C.L.R. James, Beyond the Boundary, which has an epigraph at the beginning where CLR says, if all you know about England is what's inside England, you don't know very much about England. So those of you who are born in this country, if all you know about this country is what happens inside this country, you don't know very much about this country. And that's the connection between being a teacher and being an activist. In the next 12 years, it will be possible to elect a president in this country. Not that that's going to make any difference. But it's going to be possible to elect a president in this country without any white votes. Already the majority of the school children in the American public schools are either Latinos or African Americans, and they will be a voting age in the next 12 years. And I'd say it's not going to make any difference because it's not going to alter the relations of power. It's not going to alter the property relations. It's not going to alter the military relations, and it's certainly not going to alter who makes movies in California or who owns the banks. But there are 2 or 3 things that I think are important to keep in mind with regards to having some knowledge about what takes place in the colonies and what takes place inside the core of the American empire that addresses some of the issues that Cedric raised. One of those is the following. I have 3 more things to say and then I'm done. Several years ago, in 1964, an African American of West Indian origin named Malcolm X was in London, and he was staying in the home of another West Indian named John Carew. And one of the things that John Carew had to answer at Malcolm X's request, Malcolm X asked him, why are you West Indians so cocky? You know, why are you so sure of yourselves? And John Carew answered the following. John Carew says, because we know where we're from. And there is a lot of value in knowing where you're from. That's not only the reason for Black Studies programs in North American universities. That's also the reason why it's possible in places that our universities are as opposed to factories that produce graduates, to connect what happens in the present with what has happened in the past. Knowing where you're from in context is very important. It's very important for the following reason. There are some things that are negotiable that have to do with quantity. What you cannot negotiate is quality. You can negotiate how much you're going to get paid, but you cannot negotiate who makes the decisions in the site of production. Some of you may know that for several years I was in the leadership of the faculty union in this campus. And we tried to turn the faculty association meetings into a learning experience for all of us. We didn't have a lot of success. Those who've been here in the last 10 years can imagine or have had contact with it. And let me give an example before I finish. There is going to be a medical school on this campus, if I understand correctly. And that decision was made while I was out on a medical leave, and upon returning to my teaching responsibilities, the president of this House of Higher Education held a meeting to discuss with all of us about the possibility of this medical school, or not the possibility, the imminent implementation of this medical school. And I asked Coach Dunn the following. You know, I was out for a while, and I don't remember when the faculty voted. When did the faculty vote to determine whether we had a school of medicine or not? Why? Because universities are the only place where the workers run the production process. At least since the 8th century, when universities started in Africa, in Morocco, and in Egypt, and in Asia, in Iraq. The guilds that produced graduates were made up of professors, masters, and mistresses in their field who made all of the decisions about what took place in the campus. And the only way to legitimize what takes place in a university is if the professors vote for it. If the professors vote for, listen carefully now, the professors vote for who are their chairs. That's the only way that chair is legitimate. If the professors vote for who are their deans, that's the only way to legitimize the dean. If the professors vote for who is the university president, that's what practicing democracy looks like. The difference between myth and utopia is that those of us who understand that history can imagine an alternative to the existing order. Those who do not know the history think that this is the only possibility, to have some kind of illuminated authoritarian regime where we're told there's going to be a school of medicine and you don't need to know who's paying for it. And there's no ethical criteria to determine whether we accept an anonymous donation or not. For all we know, it could be paid for by the Colombian drug cartels who just want to have their warriors in a healthy condition. But again, if you know that history, if you know that the first universities were in Fez, in Morocco, in Cairo, Egypt, in Iran, in Isfahan. And in those universities, the professors decided who was going to be chair, who was going to be dean, who was going to be president. Then you can imagine an alternative, even here in Disney World. Now, let me say two more things and I'm done. I was first invited here, as some of you may remember, to direct research unit for race and ethnic relations. And some of the people who were good enough to answer the invitation are here today, and I want to thank you again for the work that you did between 1999 and 2002. During that 3-year period, some folks in the senior administration asked me to meet with them to tell me the following, which I have never made public, among other reasons because nobody's asked me to make public why I resigned. But some of the senior administrators said, you know, some people in the town, the folks who really run the town, are quite nervous with the research lines that this institute is developing, because instead of looking at issues of folklore and pageantry and diet, which is what, or at this current oxymoron sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce called poverty reduction, among people who don't have the imagination to consider the possibility of abolishing poverty or abolishing exploitation. Well, the people who run the town are quite nervous with these lines, because you're talking about race and ethnic relations in terms of power inequities. You're talking about unequal relations of power as they're expressed in health, in schooling, in housing, in segregated conditions here in the segregated job market, and they're not interested in this going on. I said, fine, get yourselves another person. But I told you when I was invited to interview for this job that that's what I was going to do. And you hired me, so I thought that that's what you expected me to do. Which brings me to my last point. The administration now has decided to dismantle Africana studies at a time and has not given any explanation to the students and has certainly not given any explanation to the faculty. And you can ask some of the students who are here whether what I'm saying is correct or not. And this decision also is connected to history and to context. But at a time in American history when the demographics are changing more dramatically than they've changed in the last 250 years, you think that somebody would have the foresight or would have the insight, if not the imagination. We can't be too demanding with bureaucrats. Expect them to be intelligent or creative or imaginative. But you think they have not the gift, but at least they have the sense to hire somebody who had the gift to make the forecast about what's coming down the line and the kind of curriculum and faculty that you need in order to be able to attract other professors and other students to produce knowledge that is relevant for the next 20 or 30 years. That's not the case. So what I think we need to do here, and I would thank the students and Yvette who got me accomplished in this whole endeavor, is to think about how we can imagine what a democratic university could look like. Certainly, it's not anywhere in operation in the state of Michigan, given the nerd who's running the state together with the legislators in Lansing. Or he's running the state without legislators in Lansing because he paid for it. What kind of curriculum and what kind of faculty and what kind of democratic decision-making process do we need in order to produce the kind of knowledge that would be relevant in the next 20 or 30 years? And to make sure, as I tell the students, to make sure that none of you sleep tonight, let me tell you what the next 20 or 30 years are going to look like. Peak petroleum, that means no petroleum, drought, famine, here inside the United States. Most of the major cities, as Mike Davis proposes in the Planet of Slums, most of the major cities are going to be surrounded by an equal a number of people who live in areas where there will be no electricity, no running water, no schools, no police service, etc. That's the future. And if any of you have been told by your investment counselor that this current economic crisis is going to be over, or that this current economic crisis is on its way to being resolved, the only reason why they're telling you that is so you don't commit suicide. Because this is not a hiccup or a blip in the economic history of the country. This is a crisis of the economic structures. And this is not going to be solved by changing president. In the Caribbean, we have at least 200 years of experience with black presidents. And I assure you, from the last example with Duvalier or Manley in Jamaica, they're not any better than their white predecessors, as you will find in your own history for the next 200 years. So changing the color of the president does not change or does not provide any prospect of solutions to this economic crisis. To get back to what Cedric was pointing out about the relevance of the black radical tradition to this whole context in terms of its history, its present, and its future. Most universities that still have Black Studies programs, and for those of you who are in the National Council of Black Studies, I was told that there will be a panel about this in March in Indiana with some directors of Black Studies programs across the United States. In this context, Black Studies can provide some ideas about what is possible in other parts of the world. Likewise, the senior administrators in most American universities are filling ethnic studies programs, and particularly Black Studies programs, with faculty who have no experience or do not have the access to this Black radical tradition, which not only questions the current process, but also is capable of providing what people like Du Bois and C.L.R. James and Richard Wright, which is the third part of Cedric's book, but also can provide some understanding of the future. Several Black Studies programs in this country are being filled by administrators whose malice I don't doubt, with migrants from Africa who are not interested in making this a more democratic place. They just want to make a place for themselves here in the kind of authoritarian regime that made it possible for them to get a bourgeois education in Africa and come here. And I will only mention, to make sure that some of you in the House know exactly who I'm talking about. It's no coincidence that the children of the 3 Africans who overthrew Nkrumah in Ghana, with the help of the American embassy, are among the most rewarded, richly rewarded hooligans in the American Academy. Busia, Apia, and I forgot the third. You can ask Ahmed in the back. Dangwa. All 3 are richly rewarded because they're accomplices of that existing order. In one point in his life, Walter Rodney spoke about C.L.R. James, and he said that when Walter Rodney died, he wanted to be remembered like C.L.R. James, as somebody who had not been a revolutionary, or somebody who had been progressive, but somebody who was progressive till his dying day, and somebody who was a revolutionary. And in the journal where Cedric writes, and I often get a little space, Sivanandan said that could have been also said about that. I hope that someday my students, and as I will be able to say about Cedric J, might die